Hello, my name is Cara Baxter, and I am a second-year student in the Masters of Applied Behavior Analysis program at the University of Kentucky. The proposed project is titled The Comparison of Differential Effects of Interpolated and Intermittent Reinforcement on Extinction Resistance. Throughout the presentation, we will go through the proposed research question, an introduction to the topic, as well as some background information, and then findings from previous research, the participants, the methods, and the study design. The purpose of this study is to extend the findings from Higbee and Cara to compare the differential effects of prior exposure to a continuous and intermittent schedule of reinforcement on responding during subsequent extinction with individuals with or at risk for cognitive or developmental disability. I really want to answer this question because there's an overall lack of research on this topic with human subjects, and the studies that have been conducted have produced varied findings. In addition, more research on this topic could potentially impact the efficiency of extinction. So before we get into the partial reinforcement extinction effect and the interpolation of reinforcement effect, let's talk a little bit about schedules of reinforcement. So schedules of reinforcement refer to when reinforcement may be delivered following a behavior. A continuous schedule of reinforcement means that reinforcement is delivered following every occurrence of the behavior, whereas employing an intermittent schedule means that reinforcement is going to be varied, so it's not delivered after each occurrence of the target behavior. In this study, a variable ratio of 3 will be utilized, meaning that reinforcement will be delivered on average of every third occurrence of the target behavior. While continuous and intermittent schedules include the delivery of reinforcement, the use of extinction means that reinforcement is no longer delivered for that target response. The partial reinforcement extinction effect, or the PREE, just explains that behavior that's reinforced on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement is going to be more resistant to extinction than a behavior on a continuous schedule of reinforcement. So an example of this phenomenon might look like if a teacher told their student, "Great job," every time after completing one math problem correctly, and we're assuming that praise is reinforcing, and then stopped delivering praise altogether, the behavior would extinguish quicker than it would have than if the teacher was delivering praise on an intermittent schedule of reinforcement, or saying "great job" on average of every third or fifth occurrence of the target behavior. In relation to this, the interpolation of reinforcement effect, or the IRE, shows that behaviors may be less resistant to extinction if they're moved from an intermittent schedule of reinforcement to a continuous schedule of reinforcement than if extinction followed the intermittent schedule of reinforcement alone. Using that same example, it would look a little bit like the teacher delivering reinforcement on an intermittent schedule and then intentionally moving from an intermittent to a continuous schedule in order to make the behavior extinguish quicker or be less resistant to extinction. Majority of the research involving the IRE and the PREE has been conducted in the experimental literature and involves the use of animals. However, there have been a few studies involving human subjects that have produced varied findings. In a study conducted by Higbee and colleagues, the effects of interpolated reinforcement were investigated with 4 male children between the ages of 4 and 6 years old who were diagnosed with autism spectrum disorder. The researchers examined the response patterns during extinction following the implementation of an intermittent schedule, both with and without interpolated continuous reinforcement, and found that majority of the participants engaged in more responses during extinction following the implementation of an intermittent schedule than following interpolated reinforcement. The data in this study suggests that in order to lessen resistance to extinction, it might be necessary to interpolate continuous reinforcement between intermittent and extinction conditions rather than to implement extinction following intermittent schedule of reinforcement alone. In addition, a study conducted by Cara and colleagues, the researchers investigated the interpolated reinforcement effect with 5 3-year-old children who had no diagnoses. They assessed the effects of the prior reinforcement conditions on participant performance during extinction conditions. The results of this study showed that for majority of the participants, the IRE wasn't demonstrated. And both of these studies are evidence that more research is needed on the interpolation of reinforcement effect due to their differing results. The participants for this study will be recruited from a local applied behavior analysis clinic, and in order to be included in the study must be between the ages of 3 and 12 years old, considered at risk for a cognitive or developmental disability, and all participants must possess the skill or be able to imitate the skill of placing a quarter-sized item into a receptacle. Prior to beginning experimental sessions, a screening survey will be sent out to caregivers to determine the participant's age, race, gender, disability category, if the child has an IEP, their history of challenging behaviors, their preferred snacks, and any food allergies they may have. All completed survey data will inform the researcher on participant demographics and what preferred items to use during the stimulus preference assessment. Any questions about food allergies are just included to ensure that any edibles used during reinforcement are both safe and caregiver approved prior to the session. In addition, any information stating that the participant engages in abnormally high rates of challenging behavior or any severe behavior may exclude the participant from being in the study. An observation will also occur to ensure that the participant is able to imitate the skill, along with to collect data on their preferred type of praise and any challenging behaviors that the participant may engage in. A preference assessment will be conducted prior to each session. The information gathered from the screening survey and the participant observation will inform what food items to use during the assessment. The first pick that the participant chooses will be used for the reinforcer for that individual session. Since this study requires the use of extinction, and due to the ethicality of extinguishing socially significant behaviors, arbitrary target behaviors were chosen. Each participant will engage in both of the two target behaviors, moving a ball from a bin to a cardboard container, and moving a poker chip from a bin to a cardboard container. The target behavior will be defined as any instance the participant takes a ball or poker chip out of the bin and places that ball or poker chip into the cardboard container on the table. The dependent variables for the study will be the count of responses with timestamps and the number of sessions to suppression, or what we are calling the extinction criteria. Each participant will be exposed to both tasks, and the assignment of tasks will be counterbalanced. Both behaviors will be measured using an event recording system. The researcher and data collectors will use count with timestamps to measure the occurrences of the target behavior, and will use the County app to collect their data. For this project, an adapted alternating treatments design was chosen due to its usefulness in comparing effective treatments with one another so that researchers are able to see which schedule of reinforcement is superior, meaning which schedule is least resistant to extinction. This design was also chosen because it requires the use of behaviors that are functionally equivalent but also independent. Additionally, it is important that the behaviors chosen are of equal difficulty. As you can see in the model graph on the right-hand side, it's expected that we will see the behavior that was reinforced on a continuous schedule of reinforcement decrease quicker than the one that stayed on an intermittent schedule prior to extinction. And for ease of quick visual analysis, the behaviors are color-coded in red and green. These are the procedures that will occur consistently throughout each condition. All sessions will be a total of 5 minutes, and the setup room is not going to change throughout the study, and it will consist of a table, the items for the task, and a small bookshelf of items that are going to be neutral to the participant. The attentional cue will be, "Look at me when you're ready to start." Following this, an attentional response should be given and could consist of the participant either looking at the researcher or saying yes. The task demand is going to be presented directly after and will consist of the researcher modeling the behavior and saying, "You can put as many items in the box as you would like, but you can only use one hand. Go ahead." If the participant doesn't respond within 15 seconds of the task direction, a vocal reminder will be placed to put the items in the box. During baseline conditions, participants will be tested on both independent skills. The data collectors will take data on participant responses, specifically if they are able to correctly sort the items into their respective bins. During baseline sessions, there will be no program consequences for the target behavior. Baseline sessions will be conducted until the participant has low and stable rates of responding for at least 3 to 5 sessions. In the intermittent conditions, the researcher will present the same task direction and then model the target behavior for the participant. If the participant doesn't respond within 3 seconds or begins to engage in an incorrect response, then the researcher will use a physical prompt to ensure that the participant engages in the correct response. Both unprompted responses and prompted responses will be reinforced, but data will only be collected on the independent correct responses. Following the participant engaging in the correct target behavior, The researcher will provide verbal praise as well as a preferred food item to the participant. In the beginning of the condition, the participant's behavior will be reinforced on a continuous schedule of reinforcement contingent on engaging in the correct target behavior. And once 3 consecutive sessions are observed where response rates are greater than those observed at the end of the baseline condition, the schedule of reinforcement will be thinned from a continuous to an intermittent for both of the target behaviors. The comparison condition, or IRE versus INT, will begin once visual inspection of the graph shows 5 consecutive sessions indicating no downward trend. In the IRE versus INT condition, 1 target behavior will be returned to a continuous schedule of reinforcement, and 1 behavior will remain on an intermittent schedule, specifically a variable ratio 3. Reinforcers used during this will consist of verbal praise alongside the preferred food item. During this condition, data will be collected on each participant response for both schedules. The criterion to move to the next condition will be when there are a minimum of 5 data points in which the intermittent schedule produces higher response rates than the IRE schedule. When the participants meet the criteria for the IRE versus INT condition, each target behavior will be exposed to the extinction condition. When extinction is implemented, this means no reinforcement will be provided following the target behaviors. When participants are given the task direction to complete the target behavior, no reinforcement or no verbal praise plus a preferred food item is going to follow the completion of the behavior. The extinction sessions will be continued until 3 consecutive sessions where participant responding is either at or below the mean rate of the most 5 recent baseline sessions. These are my references. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to this presentation.